now, good morning. Happy Tuesday, PASW staff, clients, friends joining us. Yesterday was a lot of fun looking at Big Night. Hope you guys enjoyed that. I love that movie, as you can tell. And get a cool, easy breezy score to me today. A song, and you can have words this time. So I'm a little more lenient. And then we'll see your results Friday. So yes, you read correctly. It's Miles Davis and Steve Reich revisited. Now, we revisited Miles Davis a few weeks ago with So What, so don't think I'm just on auto coasting here. But there's a part of a Miles Davis class that I want you to listen to. We're going to talk about Gil Evans tomorrow. And we're also going to talk about Steve Reich a little bit tomorrow. So we're going to review Miles Davis class, focusing on Gil Evans. Then we're going to also review, this is today, our Steve Reich class from a few years ago. And you're probably wondering, what are these two people, what am I even talking about? Tomorrow we're going to go into our advanced class, looking at one particular song by Gil Evans entitled La Nevada, Snow Falling. Lovely piece, very different for 1960. So we'll dive in, but first let's look at Gil Evans from our Miles class. Then let's review Steve Reich and minimalism, and then we'll see how all of these different things plug in, because I know it sounds kind of abstract. So here's Gil Evans, and here's Steve Reich. So he meets Gil Evans in the 40s, and Gil Evans has this little apartment in Midtown Manhattan, and he kind of hosts these little jazz parties or whatever. And they liked Gil Evans because he knew a lot about jazz, but he was trained in classical music. Kind of maybe like George Martin from the Beatles. He was trained in classical music, but he had an ear for what was also the future of music to come. So Miles really takes an interest in Gil Evans and thinks that he has something to offer, because he looks at Gil Evans' original scores and arrangements. Gil Evans was really an arranger, orchestrator, more than a songwriter. And in return, Gil Evans starts looking at and listening to Miles's sound develop as his own voice, rather than a second-rate or third-rate Dizzy Gillespie, who was a master at bebop, but that just was different than Miles. That's something that he wasn't really, interested in, being a second rate when you can be a first rate, original voice. So they come up with a pretty important album called Birth of the Cool, which was recorded between 1949 and 1950. Birth of the Cool was really important because it kind of was influenced by classical music arrangements and classical music elements, I should say, sorry. And it was kind of post bebop, so it was after, bebop's what we talked about, the crazy fast music, right? Crazy fast jazz music. 40s, late 40s, early 50s, we come into something that Miles and Gil Evans and other people as well, called cool jazz. And cool jazz takes a slower paced approach and influences of classical music too. And we and it's not slower because it's easier to play at all. It's got its own mellow, original voice to it. It's jazz, but it's completely different, as we can hear. Steve Reich. Okay, so one of the founders of minimalism music. So by minimalism, let's break that down a little bit more. The biggest part about Steve Reich's music is the rhythmic aspects, and also pitch, but more about rhythm. Okay, so Reich's music is really marked by its repetitive figures and harmonic rhythm and canons. But let's keep it simple and talk about his repetitive figures and his innovation with tape loops and phasing. Okay, so what are these words I'm talking about? They're just fancy composition words. Let's talk about his early music. His early music was okay. So he was involved with phasing. So what's phasing? Okay, so here we're going along the lines like this, right? We're not phasing. We start to shift. We start phasing, right? Okay, so in the 60s, he creates this kind of these phasing patterns. What do I mean by that? Okay, let's listen to this piece. This is one of his earliest compositions. And I know at the beginning it's going to sound avant-garde and not really music that you want to listen to, but we have to understand his early process. How did he come to write the music that we're going to be playing at the end, which is some of my favorite music that's popular in the classical repertoire? How did he get there? So let's start with a piece of music that he started, and phasing, okay? We're going to listen to something called It's Gonna Rain. And this was in 1965.
He began to warn the people. He said, after all, it's going to rain after all for 40 days and for 40 nights. And the people didn't believe him. And they began to laugh at him. And they began to mock him. And they began to say, it ain't rain. It's going to 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 rain.
Piece goes on way longer, but I just want to tell you, so Reich recorded a sermon about this Pentecostal preacher talking about the end of the world on the streets of New York. Okay, so that's a real sermon guy. So he records him, and then he starts taping. He tapes him, and he transfers the last three words of the fragment. It's gonna rain. Okay, so stay with me. And he multiplies these tape loops, which gradually go in and out of phase with each other. So do you hear how just one little thing, it's gonna rain, it starts shifting into creating this rhythm. It's repetitive structure, right? Is that music? Well, it's almost music. There's kind of pitch. We're gonna get to his pitch later, but right now he's establishing this rhythmic phrasing of going out of sync with each other, but it's not out of sync where it's chaos. It's out of sync where it's it's got like a motor. It's got like something he's developing this music this process music that's going to be changing and evolving throughout the piece. So this is one of his first pieces where he's experimenting with phasing music, okay? And then the second thing I said pulse music. So what's pulse? We all have a pulse, right? Heartbeat. It's just, and a pulse is something that's kind of continuous, right? That's breathing, living. So what does that mean with music? How does that translate to music? So he's creating, what he starts creating after these phase things is he's gonna, so because of a phase, a pulse comes, right? Okay, so and we're going to see how he does that. So he studies drumming in Africa. He goes to Africa and studies drumming and he comes back with an album in New York called Drumming. And this is when the pulse is really being set, okay? So when you listen to Steve Reich, you always are going to hear something that's fast-paced pulse where they sound like eighth notes. Okay, well, that could be boring music, right? So he's laid down the rhythm, the pitch, the phrasing of it, the phasing of it. Now, where do you go with that to make it sound musical? Yep, you guessed it, harmony. Now we need harmony to make it sound musical, right? So what kind of harmony is he using? Well, he's using fourths and fifths and open chords and chords that are sustained. Remember we talked about modal music where there aren't that many chord changes. Well, with him, there are chord changes, but if we're going to look at one of his most famous pieces, 1978, Music for 82 Musicians, and this is process music. This is music that's evolving. It's not so much chord changes. It's hard to explain because I love this piece so much. But this piece, Music for 82 Musicians, it came out on vinyl, 1978, I should say. but this is the one we're going to be talking about. So it's an hour-long piece. The entire piece is an hour, and it goes through different moods and phases, but mostly it's got the pulse the entire time. Okay, so you guessed it, music for 18 musicians is for a piece for 18 musicians. So he's got violins, cellos, 4 female voices, 2 pianos, another piano who also plays maracas because they alternate, marimbas and xylophones, clarinets, bass clarinets, another female lead who's also playing vocals. So they'll switch around during the piece to play other instruments. Okay, so it's a piece that's based on 11 chords. So within that hour thing, there are 11 chords, which are not that many chords when you think about it, and that's why that's why we're talking about the harmony of it. And a small piece of the music is based on each chord, okay? And the piece returns to the original cycle at the end. And so there's different sections in the piece, and one's called pulses, the others are titled section 1, section 2, and this is one of his first pieces where he's writing for larger ensembles, whereas before it's just for maybe 5 or 6 marimba players, people clapping hands, but now this is a large ensemble he's writing for. And so these players, they play the pulsing notes for as long as they can hold it. The singers, the instrumentalists, and each chord's melodically, it's deconstructed really by the ensemble when you listen to it. And then you'll hear the vibraphone kind of come in and let everyone know, okay, now we're going to the next section. So like this example. The vibraphone's a conductor, but with Philip Glass, Steve Reich, they have their ensembles. They don't really usually have a conductor. It's not conventional classical music. So in this case, they'll look at the vibraphone player, and just in case people get lost, because I mean, an hour-long piece, you don't want to be at minute 50 and say, oh, we got to go back. So like you just saw, Gil Evans had a different sound that Miles really liked. And Gil Evans is going to create an album that we're going to look at tomorrow, and one song tomorrow. We're going to look at that. Steve Reich, we looked at his rhythmic processes, process music, gradual music, and we're going to see how those terms relate to something Gil Evans was doing in 1960. Really early, way before, minimalism, really. Yeah, it's going to be fun. So tomorrow we'll dive in deeper to our advanced class. I hope you enjoyed today's review of Gil Evans and Steve Reich, and then we'll do some advanced hardcore thinking tomorrow. Okay, have a great rest of the day. See you tomorrow. Bye.